Paul Revere's Midnight Ride is one of the most well-known stories in American history. Paul Revere, alongside his fellow courier, William Dawes, rode through the night warning of an attack by the British. Their main destination was that of Lexington to warn both John Hancock and Samuel Adams of the British invasion, warning countless others on the way. One of the most well-known details is that of Revere's famous line, "The British are coming," a line which actually was never said by Paul Revere or William Dawes. At the time, the United States of America did not exist yet, remember, so technically speaking, everyone in the colonies was British. Therefore, it wouldn't have made a whole lot of sense for him to say the British are coming. Instead, Revere most likely said the regulars are coming. Also worth noting that Paul Revere was not a soldier, but instead he was a courier as a member of the Sons of Liberty. Also some backstory on Paul Revere. Prior to his efforts in the American Revolution, he had actually been a successful tradesman, inheriting his very own silver shop after his dad had passed away. Gas prices in the early 1970s hadn't quite skyrocketed yet as they would in the mid to late 1970s. However, most car brands knew that it was only a matter of time before they did. So developing a fuel-efficient car was the main focus of many of the top car manufacturers. American cars struggled at this, and Japanese cars thrived at this, causing the Americans to enter a state of struggling innovation. Ford Motor Company, however, had big plans to stick it to the big, hulking American car reputation with the Ford Pinto. The Ford Pinto was a small, fuel-efficient car that was promised to weigh less than 2,000 pounds and cost less than $2,000. All was not well over at Ford, though, as they were hiding a very dark secret. I know, a shocker, a major billion-dollar corporation lies to its consumer. Anyway, the Ford Motor Company ran into we'll call it a design flaw on the Ford Pinto. When the Ford Pinto was struck from behind at a speed of 20 miles per hour or more, it would rupture the car's gas tank, causing a fire and eventual explosion. The Pinto's gas tank was way too close to the rear axle housing, which had several protruding bolts that punctured the gas tank with relative ease on impact. In order to fix this issue, Ford Motor Company only had to spend $11 per car on redesigns and repairs. So, Ford spent the $11 and fixed the Ford just kidding, they decided to run cost analysis. Cost analysis would prove to Ford that it would actually be more cost effective to do nothing about the flaw and instead calculate how many vehicles would be destroyed in accidents, how many burn victims there would be, and how many deaths there would be because of the issue. Ford came to the conclusion that 2,100 cars would be destroyed, 180 people would be burned, and 180 people would be dead. Because one death is a tragedy, and 180 deaths is just a statistic, right? It's just the cost of doing business. Ford's cost analysis showed that $137 million would have to be spent to fix the flawed gas tank design. Ford's cost analysis also calculated just how much revenue would be made by fixing this issue, and that number was only $49.5 million, putting their gross profit at a negative $87.5 million. 180 human lives apparently cost $80 million to the Ford Motor Company. Death Valley, California, record holder for the hottest day in history at 134.1 degrees on the 10th of July, 1913. Now, there is some controversy, as some believe this might be a myth, but for now we'll stand by it. The highest global average temperature ever recorded in history was 62.8 degrees Fahrenheit on July 22nd, 2024. It just happened, and this is a record which will probably be an annual tradition moving forward, but anyway, let's move on. The highest overnight low temperature was 111.6 degrees Fahrenheit in Oman on June 25, 2018. Sometimes heat can be measured using the feel-like scale, where multiple factors such as humidity and wind are taken into account. The hottest feel-like temperature that has ever been recorded on Earth was 178 degrees Fahrenheit in Saudi Arabia in 2003. On the other side of the temperature spectrum, the coldest temperature ever recorded on Earth was negative 128.6 degrees Fahrenheit in Antarctica in 1983. The country with the highest lowest temperature ever recorded in history is the Caribbean island of Curacao. Their coldest temperature on record was 66 degrees in 2017. Frederick Smith is the founder and former CEO of FedEx. He's worth an estimated $6.6 billion in 2024 and is a very, very lucky man. Smith's business model for FedEx was based on a paper he had wrote in school, of which he does not even remember what grade he received.
Well, I don't really remember exactly, but at one time in an interview like this, I said, I guess I got my usual gentlemanly C, and so that just sort of stuck, but we'll just leave it at that, I suppose.
What Smith does remember receiving was $4 million of inheritance money, on top of another $80 million in loans to start his FedEx company, which was not an immediate success. FedEx was so unsuccessful, in fact, in its first few years, that the company was on the verge of bankruptcy, all while Smith's attempted business proposals to receive more funding proved unsuccessful as well. FedEx net worth had shrunk to just $5,000, and the end was imminent. After yet another failed pitch with the company General Dynamics, Smith decided to stop in Las Vegas on his return home. Smith won $27,000 in a game of blackjack, which he immediately wired back to FedEx. This winning was more than just some extra cash for Smith, though. He claimed it served as a good luck omen that things were beginning to look up. Have you ever wondered the heights of some of your favorite or maybe the most prominent historical figures in history? You might be shocked to learn that some were a lot taller than some might think, or a lot shorter than some might think. If you've ever been interested in learning history, you've definitely seen tons of paintings and sculptures or even pictures of some more recent historical figures of the past. But have you ever wondered just how tall or short they were? For example, Alexander the Great was rumored to have only been 5 feet tall, some historians even saying he was as short as 4'9". However, it is widely accepted that he was probably around 5'7" or 5'6". Joseph Stalin was around 5'5", Winston Churchill was around 5'6", Adolf Hitler was around 5'9", and Benito Mussolini stood at about 5'7". I guess something about taking over the world being the biggest overcompensation a man could have. Abraham Lincoln is perhaps the most well-recognized tall historical figure, standing between 6'3" and 6'4". However, when he was wearing his top hat, he stood at about 6'7", truly a larger-than-life individual. William Wallace was estimated to be around 6'7", despite being played by 5'9" Mel Gibson in Braveheart. Osama bin Laden was 6'5". Lyndon B. Johnson tied Abraham Lincoln as the tallest president in history, also standing at 6'4", and George Washington stood at a proud 6'2". Have you ever wondered what the most consumed food in the world is? Perhaps in the history of mankind? First guesses would be rice, potatoes, maybe bread, maybe chicken. Well, it would appear that rice is probably the best guess there is, as rice has been consumed by humans on this planet for over 10,000 years. The very first account of domesticated rice is still up in the air. However, the first official discovery was found to be sometime between 8000 BC and 9000 BC in China. With that much of a head start, rice would no doubtedly take the number one spot, ahead of potatoes, tomatoes, pasta, wheat, etc., etc. But what about salt? Yes, salt. Although salt may not be the most consumed food in history, it has been sought after like no other resource in history. There have been wars fought over it, territories claimed for it, and countless deaths in the pursuit of the precious mineral. The first account of salt being used was again by the Chinese, as they would evaporate ocean water and use the mineral to sprinkle over their food and make sauce. In the Middle Ages, salt was used to preserve meat, as it oftentimes had to last days, if not weeks, before being consumed. It was only until the Industrial Revolution and the idea of surplus where salt became more obtainable through less violent and dangerous means. So although rice does seem to take the cake as the most consumed food in history, don't count out salt. It would not be easy to nail down an exact number on any of these foods, especially salt, since it was used in sauces and keeping meats preserved. But really, salt has been everywhere, all throughout mankind, in every single culture, and it still is to this day. What is the biggest historical event in human history? How would one even go about measuring this? By landmass? By total attendance? By significance, importance, or relevancy? How about all of the above? For starters, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which was the spark to World War I, not only causing millions of deaths itself, but forming a perfect segue for a certain Austrian painter to catapult the events of World War II, the deadliest single conflict in human history. How about the Kumbh Mela religious gathering in 2013, where an unbelievable 120 million people gathered in the Indian city of Allahabad for a Hindu festival? Before answering this question, we do have to understand that history doesn't happen in a vacuum. History is a collective slideshow of events, one after another, each cause and effect of previous mistakes, triumphs, and coincidences. Looking at one single event as an individual status could lead to confusion. Instead, looking at history as a never-ending segue can help us understand better why things happen the way they do. With this in mind, I think that certainly it seems that the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand would take the spot as the quote-unquote biggest historical event in the history of mankind. World War I and World War II would redefine the world as we know it. Its effects will never leave this world again. And although the assassination was simply a spark that started an inevitable war, it must still be recognized as the turning point in mankind's history.